Claire Denis' Beau Travail is at its core a Freudian tragedy, a meditation and philosophical pondering on repressed desire, the death drive, and the sacrifice of individualism under the authority of collective military life. You see something beautiful, desirable. You cannot obtain said thing that is beautiful or desirable, which leads you to want to destroy it or subvert it. This is the emotional and symbolic core of Beau Travail, a French movie about an ex-French foreign legionnaire called Galop, who recalls his experiences in Djibouti, where he leads a section of men under the command of Bruno Forestier. Discipline is the only language that these soldiers know, but we find out that this conventional Hollywood view of military life doesn't hold up in Claire Denis' world. She tackles this experience through a completely different lens, where military life is one of rhythm and one that desires expression. Denis explores military life in the Legion through a female gaze, stripped of charisma and persuasion, of the attractive masculine virtues that Hollywood straps onto it. This is made eerily clear when a new legionnaire joins Galop's section. His name is Saint-Anne. He is an exemplary soldier, even liked by his comrades, but also one that doesn't seem to have lost himself along the way like Galop. Saint-Anne does not challenge Galop's authority directly. What he does, and what makes him dangerous, is exist in a way that is too beautiful, too free, and too whole for Galop. Saint-Anne's grace and quiet charisma becomes unbearable for Galop, not because they violate military discipline, but because they expose the cracks in Galop's carefully assembled psychic armor. In Freud's psychoanalytical scripture, Saint-Anne becomes the screen onto which Galop projects his repressed desires. Not necessarily sexual, but admiration, envy, longing, and rage coalesce into a fixation. This is classic projection. What Galop cannot tolerate in himself, vulnerability, emotion, even tenderness, he casts onto Saint-Anne and then attacks. Freud's theory of narcissism helps clarify this dynamic. The narcissist does not simply love themselves, rather they are in love with an ideal image of themselves. Galop believes he is a perfect legionnaire. He even wants recognition from his superior, Forestier. But narcissists also hate anything that reminds them of their imperfections. Saint-Anne represents a narcissistic wound for Galop. He embodies a form of masculinity that is both physical and emotional, but strong and graceful. Galop cannot reconcile this with his own image of manhood, forged through violence and suppression. Saint-Anne is what Galop wants to be, or once wanted to be, but has long since repressed. The more Saint-Anne shines, the more Galop crumbles. The point of acceleration happens when Saint-Anne saves one of his fellow legionnaires from drowning and is outright praised by Forestier for his acts of courage. Freud's idea of the uncanny, das Unheimliche, becomes useful. The uncanny refers to something that feels both familiar and strange, something repressed that returns in an alien form. Saint-Anne is uncanny to Galop. He reminds him of something lost, an earlier version of himself, or a potential self he never became. That tension between attraction and threat, memory and disavowal, fuels Galop's breakdown. He doesn't merely dislike Saint-Anne, he must destroy him to preserve his own fragile identity. In psychoanalytic language, this is a defense mechanism. Saint-Anne is a psychic threat, so Galop constructs a narrative of unsubordination, guilt, and punishment to justify the expulsion of what he cannot consciously confront. Galop, in a final act of trying to expose his own narcissistic qualities that he has projected onto Saint-Anne, drops him in the barren desert of Djibouti with nothing but a backpack and a broken compass to his death. The disciplined ritualistic drills of the French Foreign Legion symbolize a sublimation of the death drive, the Thanatos. The soldiers move in synchronized repetitive motions, erasing individuality and desire in favor of mechanical order. The rigid militaristic nature of Galop restricts him from even forming coherent reasons for his hate of Saint-Anne. In the end, Saint-Anne is found alive, but in a critical state by some natives. His broken compass is found and retrieved by one of the legionnaires under Galou's command, and it is brought to Forestier, who dishonorably discharges Galou and sends him to a court-martial. The camera lingers on the muscular, glistening bodies of the legionnaires during training exercises, transforming conventional military discipline of Hollywood into a kind of sensual choreography. Their movements are synchronized, almost balletic, and framed not as instruments of war, but as aesthetic forms, echoing admiration, envy, and eroticism all at once. The absence of women in the Foreign Legion compounds this charge. In such an all-male world, intimacy, rivalry, desire, and repression collapse into one another. Ethics become aesthetics, as Foucault would say. Claire Denis approaches this masculine world with a distinctly female gaze, not to feminize the men, but to reframe how we see them. Where a traditional male gaze might objectify female bodies for consumption, Denis' camera turns that gaze onto men, but with a mix of distance and tenderness, not voyeuristic. This shifts the dynamic. The film doesn't eroticize male bodies for power or pleasure, but instead shows how beauty, desire, and violence intertwine within the male psyche, particularly in environments of hypermasculinity. Galou returns to civilian life, free from the rigid power structures of the panoptical legions. He reflects on his time in his voiceover, distantly and with somewhat regret. But the final scene is really brilliant and what brings it all together. It's Galou by himself in a club-looking room. The song The Rhythm of the Night is playing, and from his unanimated and from his non-animated authoritarian nature, he breaks out into an almost hallucinating dance. What makes it even more interesting is just a few minutes before, we saw flashes of Galou with a gun in his hand, lying on his bed. So it leaves an air of ambiguity, as all great endings do. Is this dance he breaks out into a final cry of help? Years of emotions unanswered or unexplored breaking out? Or is it his coming of age, his individuation after years of programming, of becoming a docile body, as Foucault would say? Whichever way you perceive the ending, the genius of Denis Claire cannot be denied in my opinion. Her vision of how she wanted to portray military life and the angle and gaze for which she searched to do it is almost unseen in cinema. Overall, Beau Travail is a movie that serves justice to the concept of portraying military life through a non-Hollywood lens, but it also dwells on post-colonial themes. The film's visual minimalism underscores the void left by colonialism. The soldiers move through deserts and abandoned structures, which for me seem to echo a eerie, vanished imperial order. The legionnaires are foreigners training in a foreign land with no real mission, in this movie at least, and their existence mirrors France's post-colonial identity crisis, still projecting authority, yet hollow inside. And while the Legion adopts men of all backgrounds and nationalities, the chain of command, Galou and Forestier, which are Frenchmen, remain in control, ordering the others around. Anyway, the post-colonialism themes of Beau Travail would probably need a whole other video to cover. It is personally one of my favorite movies ever, and if you like similar video essays or analysis on cinema, subscribing would help me very much.